In the spring of 1883, in the administrative offices of the newly completed Peabody Library in Baltimore, a maintenance clerk named Thomas Whelan reported something unusual in his logbook. The entry, dated April 3rd, records an observation made during routine inspection of the cast iron galleries. Patrons report persistent ringing sensation in ears upon departure. Duration varies. No medical cause identified. The note appears in careful script, then is crossed out in different ink. Above it, in what archivists later identified as the library director's hand, someone has written, "Acoustic properties. Expected. No action required." The morning was overcast, cool for early spring. Rain had fallen overnight, and the air inside the reading room held a peculiar density, as if sound itself had become thicker. Whelan's report describes how visitors would ascend the ornate staircase, pass through the arched entrance, and enter the 5-story atrium. Within 20 minutes, most would report the sensation. Within an hour, and some claimed they could hear their own heartbeat amplified in the silence. The official architectural record, filed with the city in 1878, lists the space as a monumental reading hall designed for acoustical clarity. Yet a separate document, discovered in 2003 during renovation work, describes the same space using different terminology. This second blueprint, undated but bearing the stamp of the original architectural firm, labels certain structural elements as resonance chambers and harmonic stabilizers. The terms appear nowhere else in 19th century American architectural literature. The contradiction sits in adjacent folders in the library's own archive. No explanation accompanies either document. The measurements, however, are identical. On a humid afternoon in July 1889, 6 years after the library's opening, a physician named Dr. Margaret Ashford submitted a letter to the Baltimore Medical Society. The letter, preserved in the Society's quarterly proceedings, describes a pattern she had observed among her patients. 12 individuals, unrelated and from different neighborhoods, had reported identical symptoms following extended visits to the Peabody Library. Temporary enhancement of auditory perception, reduced anxiety, and what she termed a persistent sense of internal stillness lasting several days. Dr. Ashford's observations were clinical, measured. She noted that the effect appeared strongest in subjects who spent 3 or more hours in the reading room. She proposed a study. The Medical Society's response, recorded in the meeting minutes of August 14, 1889, was brief. Request denied, insufficient medical basis. Yet in the margin, someone has written in pencil, see also Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève, Paris. Similar reports, 1851. The Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève had opened in 1850, designed by architect Henri Labrouste. Contemporary accounts describe its reading room as revolutionary, not for its iron framework or its expansive glass roof. But for something observers struggled to articulate. One visitor, writing in 1852, describes the experience. Upon entering, one is struck by an immediate sense of calm that exceeds mere quiet. The silence is not absence but presence, a palpable thickness in the air that seems to settle on the skin. Labrouste's original drawings, held in the Archives Nationales in Paris, contain annotations in his own hand. Certain barrel vaults are marked with frequency ratios, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and the ceiling height is specified to 3 decimal places. The spacing of the cast iron columns follows a pattern that architectural historians have noted but rarely questioned. The measurements create what acousticians would later recognize as a perfect Helmholtz resonator, a chamber specifically designed to amplify particular sound frequencies while dampening others. No record exists of Labrouste explaining these choices. His published writings focus on light, on the democratization of knowledge, on the symbolic importance of iron and glass. The acoustic properties go unmentioned. Yet a letter dated November 1851, if discovered in 1978 in a private collection, suggests he was aware of them. Writing to a colleague, Labrouste notes, "The space produces the desired effect. Visitors report heightened concentration and, curiously, relief from persistent headaches. One must be careful not to overstate such observations, lest the project be dismissed as mystical rather than practical." The frequency that both buildings, the Peabody in Baltimore and the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève in Paris, appear to amplify most strongly is approximately 7.83 Hz. This frequency is later termed the Schumann Resonance, represents the electromagnetic frequency of the Earth's atmosphere. It was not scientifically identified until 1952. Yet the architecture of these reading rooms, built decades earlier, seems specifically calibrated to reproduce it. By the autumn of 1891, in Manchester, England, construction was underway on what would become the John Rylands Library. The architect, Basil Champneys, had studied extensively in Europe. His journals, archived at the library itself, contain sketches made during visits to Paris and Baltimore. On one page, dated March 1890, he has drawn the cross-section of a vaulted ceiling. Beside it, he has written, "Note proportions, effect reported by staff but not documented in architectural literature, purpose unclear but measurable." The Rylands Library opened in 1900. Almost immediately, the reading room gained a reputation, not for its Gothic Revival splendor or its collection of rare manuscripts, but for what regular visitors described as its therapeutic atmosphere. A librarian's diary from 1902, never published but preserved in the institution's records, contains multiple entries about patrons who would visit not to read, but simply to sit. They claim the space itself provides relief from nervous disorders, the librarian writes. "I have observed several who arrive agitated and depart visibly calmed, though they have touched no book." In 1908, an acoustics researcher from the University of Manchester visited the library. His report, filed with the physics department and rediscovered in 1995, describes measurements taken at various points throughout the reading room. He notes unusual standing wave patterns and resonance characteristics inconsistent with traditional church architecture despite superficial similarity. He concludes, "The space has been engineered for acoustic effect, though to what end remains uncertain. The proportions cannot be coincidental. The measurements he recorded match, within a narrow margin, as those found in Paris and Baltimore. The ceiling heights, the width-to-length ratios, the placement of alcoves and galleries, all conform to the same underlying pattern. Yet no evidence suggests the architects collaborated. No published theory connected these designs. The similarity exists without explanation." On January 12, 1923, in a basement office of the New York Public Library, a junior cataloger named Ruth Feldman discovered a box of papers that had been misfiled for decades. The box, as labeled General Correspondence 1911, contained letters between the library's original architects, Carrère and Hastings, and a European consultant whose name appears nowhere in the official project records. Dr. Hermann von Helmholtz's nephew, also named Hermann, identified only as A. Helmholtz, acoustic consultant, Berlin. The letters discuss specific modifications to the reading room design. Young Helmholtz proposes ceiling coffers of particular depth, wall surfaces of specific materials, even the placement of wooden panels that official records describe as purely decorative. In one letter, is dated May 1908, he writes, "The human nervous system responds to environmental vibration in ways we are only beginning to measure. A reading room designed with proper acoustic consideration can reduce mental fatigue and enhance cognitive function. This is not metaphysics, but physics applied to architecture." The library's Board of Trustees, according to meeting minutes from June 1908, voted to incorporate Herr Helmholtz's suggestions where feasible, but to make no public mention of the acoustic consultation. The reason given, to avoid associations with fringe medical theories that might diminish the institution's scientific credibility. The modifications were made. The New York Public Library's main reading room opened in 1911. Within months, newspapers began reporting on its peculiar effect. The New York Times, in an article from December 1911, describes a quality of silence unlike any other public space in the city. A patron interviewed for the piece states, "I enter with a headache and leave without one. I cannot explain it, but the relief is consistent." By the 1920s, a pattern had emerged across major libraries in Europe and North America. Reading rooms built between 1850 and 1920 shared architectural features that had no clear precedent and no stated purpose. They featured specific ceiling heights, particular vault ratios, and carefully calculated reverberation times. They used materials, cast iron, limestone, specific woods, chosen for properties that went beyond strength or aesthetics. A survey conducted in 1927 by the American Institute of Architects, never published but preserved in the AIA archives, examined 12 major libraries. The survey found that all 12 exhibited acoustic anomalies characterized by enhanced low-frequency resonance and unusually long reverberation times in the 7 to 10 Hz range. The survey's author notes, "These characteristics appear intentional, though no architect has publicly claimed them as design goals. The effect on visitors is consistently reported as calming and focus-enhancing." The survey was classified as internal research and filed away. No follow-up study was commissioned. In Berlin, on a cold morning in February 1933, the Staatsbibliothek reading room was measured by researchers from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. Their equipment, newly developed for architectural acoustics, detected resonance patterns that one researcher described in his notes as biologically significant. The measurements were precise, 7.8 Hz, maintained across the entire space with remarkable consistency. The researcher, Dr. Klaus Weber, wrote in his summary, "The room functions as a three-dimensional resonator tuned to a frequency that corresponds with observed human alpha brainwaves. Whether this is coincidental or intentional cannot be determined from the architecture alone." Dr. Weber's research was interrupted by political upheaval. His laboratory was shuttered in 1935. His papers, seized and stored in various archives, were dispersed after the war. Fragments surfaced decades later in Moscow, in Washington, in London. The full study was never reassembled. By mid-century, library architecture had changed. The post-war period favored efficiency over monumentality. New libraries were built with low ceilings, modular designs, fluorescent lighting. The massive reading rooms of the previous era were dismissed as impractical, expensive to heat and maintain, relics of an age that valued grandeur over function. Yet researchers continued to note something unusual about the older spaces. A study published in 1963 in the Journal of Environmental Psychology examined user satisfaction in 20 libraries across the United States. The study found that patrons consistently rated older, pre-1920 reading rooms as more conducive to concentration and less fatiguing than modern facilities, despite the modern buildings offering better lighting, ventilation, and seating comfort. The researchers proposed various explanations: nostalgia, aesthetic preference, cultural associations with traditional architecture. They did not mention acoustics. On September 19, 1971, in the reading room of the Boston Public Library's McKim building, a graduate student in neuroscience named Janet Morrison conducted an unauthorized experiment. Using portable EEG equipment, she measured her own brain activity while sitting in various locations throughout the library. Her results, recorded in a notebook that would later form the basis of her doctoral thesis, showed consistent patterns. Within 15 minutes of sitting in the original 1895 reading room, her brainwave activity shifted toward increased alpha rhythms, the frequency associated with relaxed alertness and reduced anxiety. Morrison repeated the measurements in the library's modern extension, built in 1972. No similar shift occurred. She returned to the historic reading room and recorded the same pattern. Her thesis advisor discouraged her from publishing these results. "Too subjective," he told her. "Too difficult to control for variables." The data remained in her personal files, but Morrison had also measured something else: the ambient acoustic frequency of the reading room itself. Her notes record a persistent low-frequency hum, approximately 8 Hz, present throughout the space, even in complete silence. She wrote, "The room itself seems to generate or amplify this frequency. I can find no mechanical source. The effect appears to be structural." By the 1980s, interest in environmental psychology and neuroarchitecture was growing. So researchers began examining how built spaces affected human physiology and cognition. Yet the acoustic properties of historic libraries remained largely unstudied. When architect Christopher Alexander published A Pattern Language in 1977, he noted that great reading rooms shared certain proportions and features, but he attributed their effectiveness to visual harmony and natural light. The acoustic dimension went unmentioned. In 1989, a restoration project at the Library of Congress uncovered something unexpected. Behind layers of later modifications, workers found the original acoustic specifications for the main reading room. The document, dated 1888 and signed by architect Paul J. Pelz, included detailed calculations for reverberation time, frequency response, and what Pelz termed sympathetic resonance parameters. A note at the bottom reads, "These specifications must be maintained exactly. Deviation will compromise the room's primary function." The restoration team found the phrasing odd. Primary function, presumably, was to house books and readers. Well, what other function could Pelz have meant? No explanation appeared in any other document. The original specifications were followed, but no public announcement was made of their discovery. The restoration was completed in 1997. Visitors to the reading room began reporting, once again, the sensation of unusual calm and clarity. On October 3, 2008, researchers at MIT's Media Lab published a study on the effects of low-frequency sound on cognitive performance. The study found that exposure to frequencies between 7 and 8 Hz enhanced focus. It reduced stress markers and improved memory consolidation. The frequency matched the natural resonance of the human brain during states of relaxed alertness. The researchers proposed applications in office design, schools, hospitals. They did not mention libraries. Yet their findings explained precisely what 19th century architects had achieved without modern technology or neuroscientific understanding. The reading rooms had been designed as instruments, massive architectural resonators calibrated to produce the frequency most conducive to calm, focused thought. In 2011, as a doctoral student in architectural history at Columbia University began researching the networks of influence among Gilded Age library architects. Her dissertation, completed in 2014, traced informal correspondence and travel records. She found that many architects of major library projects had visited the same European sites, consulted the same acoustic engineers, and read the same esoteric texts on harmonic proportion. They shared knowledge that never appeared in published writings or official plans. One letter, dated 1895, surfaced in a private collection. It's written by architect Henry Hobson Richardson to a colleague. It states, "The ancients understood what we are only rediscovering, that space itself can be medicine. A properly designed hall does not merely contain sound, but shapes it, generates it, uses it to influence the bodies within. This is not magic, but mathematics." The cathedral builders knew. We have forgotten, or pretended to forget, but the knowledge persists in the buildings themselves. Richardson died in 1886, before seeing many of his insights realized in the libraries built by his successors. Yet his influence appears in their work. The proportions, the materials, the obsessive attention to acoustic detail all suggest architects working from shared but unspoken principles. In December 2015, a team from the University of Cambridge conducted a comprehensive acoustic survey of the British Library's historic reading room. Using modern sensors and computer modeling, they mapped the space's acoustic properties with unprecedented precision. Their findings, and published in the Journal of Architectural Acoustics, confirmed what scattered reports had long suggested. The room was an almost perfect Helmholtz resonator tuned to 7.83 Hz. The precision required to achieve this effect, they noted, could not have been accidental. The researchers contacted the library's archives, seeking any historical documentation of acoustic design intent. They found none. All architectural records described the space in conventional terms, a reading room designed for visual grandeur and functional efficiency. Yet the acoustic engineering that made it a tuned resonance chamber went unmentioned in every official source. Yet the effect was undeniable, measurable, repeatable. The room produced the frequency affected visitors. The pattern held across dozens of libraries on 3 continents, all built during the same historical period, all demonstrating the same acoustic characteristics, all claiming to be nothing more than practical spaces for reading. Today, in the wellness industry, frequency healing has become common. Meditation studios and therapy centers use electronic tone generators to produce 7.83 Hz, marketing it as earth resonance or Schumann frequency healing. The equipment is expensive. Sessions cost upward of $100 an hour. The effect is the same one that 19th century library architects built into stone and iron, available to anyone who climbed the steps and found a quiet chair. The connection is never made. Modern wellness practitioners cite scientific research, quantum theory, ancient wisdom traditions. And they do not mention that the same effect was engineered into public buildings a century ago by architects who called it something else, or called it nothing at all. embedding the knowledge in measurements and proportions while keeping the purpose undocumented. On a rainy Tuesday in November 2019, an acoustical engineer named Sarah Chen entered the reading room of the New York Public Library with a handheld frequency analyzer. She had been hired to assess the space for a proposed audio-visual installation. Within minutes, as her equipment registered what she later described as anomalous standing waves producing a stable 7.8 Hz signal throughout the room. Chen is familiar with acoustic engineering. She has measured concert halls, recording studios, places designed explicitly for sound. This, she wrote in her report, is different. The frequency is structural, emerging from the room's geometry and materials. It cannot be turned off because it is not being generated. It is being shaped and amplified from vibrations already present in the environment and in the bodies of visitors themselves. As the room is not producing the frequency, it is teaching bodies to resonate at that frequency. Her report went to the library's facilities department. The proposed installation was approved with modifications to avoid disrupting the room's acoustic properties. Chen's detailed analysis of those properties was filed under technical specifications and has not been published. The reading room remains as it was built. Visitors still climb the marble stairs, pass between the stone columns, take seats at the long wooden tables. Most come for the books, for the atmosphere, all for the sense of gravitas that accompanies studying in such a space. Some notice something else, a quality of silence that is more than quiet, a calm that settles into the body, a clarity of thought that persists after leaving. Few connect the sensation to the architecture. The room is beautiful, certainly, historic, impressive, inspiring. That it is also, technically, a precisely calibrated instrument for inducing specific neurological states through acoustic resonance. This remains unspoken, documented in measurements and scattered records, but absent from plaques, guidebooks, or official histories. The architects who designed these spaces are long dead. Their intentions, if they were conscious, went unrecorded or were deliberately obscured. What remains is the effect, stone and iron shaped to catch and amplify a frequency that calms the nervous system and enhances focus, not metaphysics, not mysticism. Mathematics rendered in limestone and cast iron. In 2023, a small university library in Oregon underwent renovation. The architect, reviewing historical surveys of successful reading rooms, noticed the recurring proportions. Out of curiosity, or perhaps instinct, she incorporated them into the new design. Ceiling height, vault radius, alcove dimensions, all matching the ratios found in 19th century precedents. The library opened in September 2024. Within weeks, students reported that the new reading room felt different from other study spaces on campus. They described it as calming, focusing, somehow easier to think in. The university's wellness center noted decreased use of its stress reduction programs among students who regularly use the library. No one mentioned acoustics. Yet the room was praised for its natural light, its elegant proportions, its respectful incorporation of traditional design elements. A graduate student in physics, studying there one evening, brought in a sound meter out of idle curiosity. The meter registered 7.9 Hz. She checked it, thinking the device was malfunctioning. It was not. The reading room, built with no stated awareness of frequency resonance, nevertheless produced the frequency. The pattern had been copied forward, passed through architectural precedent. It's maintained through formal similarity without explicit understanding. The knowledge persists in the buildings. It persists in the measurements, in the ratios, in the materials chosen by architects who may or may not have understood what they were creating. And it persists in the bodies of visitors who sit in these spaces, feeling something they cannot quite name, a settling, a clarity, a sense that the room itself is somehow actively conducive to thought. History records these buildings as monuments to learning, to democracy, to the public good. It rarely records them as instruments, resonant chambers calibrated to human neurology, designed to heal through sound, too low to hear, but present enough to feel. The purpose was built into the walls. The effect continues, whether named or not. If libraries were designed as healing chambers, the design was successful enough to be replicated across continents and decades, yet subtle enough to remain undocumented. The knowledge was passed through form, through precedent, through architects studying what had worked before, and reproducing it without fully understanding why. And today, Yet those spaces remain, still producing their frequency, still affecting those who enter, while the original intention, if there ever was one stated clearly, rests in archives, scattered in fragments, crossed out, relabeled, or simply forgotten in the presence of the buildings themselves.